다 되네. 다 손제 이 많은 거 야르체기 손제 니마 dimbat chadi.
Today is the seventh day of the summer teachings, the Marangok summer teachings. Before I begin the teaching,
다 딩상 아주 다지 더 벼기 벼랑 좀 쓰위네 아래 안다는 신기야 시chuan xinjian dang 다는 총회 신지에 디주클리 예배 뷰리스기 어다 디주 나로라 지 내암대 안도시 캡데도 로데기요 근데 니주
we are in
과도
a situation now where I've heard that the coronavirus epidemic is spreading in the regions of Tibet, the Tibetan Autonomous Region, as well as all of the areas in Qinghai and Sichuan, where there are large Tibetan populations. And so this is, of course, something that I have been very concerned about the situation. And I think that it's really a kind of important, a crucial thing to think about, that although the epidemic has been very well controlled in China as a whole, it is now spreading in the Tibetan regions. Now, this epidemic is something that we need to be very careful about. Personally, we Tibetans are Buddhists. We practice Tibetan Buddhism, and so we go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Instead of being afraid, it's important for us to go for refuge, to pray to the gurus, the Yidam deities, and the Dharma protectors. And if we do this, if it comes to the right point, then it will be. And we can all, to the best of our abilities, recite the Dharma mantras of the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, and deities. We can recite praises of Lady Tara. We can recite the supplications to the great master Padmasambhava. And in particular, we should write the Dharanis of Marichi and of Panashavari. So if you know how to recite these, you should do so. It will bring great benefit. Now, this does give us we do have a lot of difficulties in terms of going back and forth traveling. So the main thing is that we need to increase our own internal mental strength and our own enthusiasm. That is what is most important. And so for my own part, I make the aspiration that all of the people who are in the Tibetan regions may be healthy and happy. And I'd like to ask all of you to please make similar prayers. Now, so for today's teaching, the other day we spoke about the topic of Kashyapa. I taught in brief the life story of Mahakashyapa in brief. There's quite a bit more that could be said, though there's quite a lot more to say. For one perspective, there's not a whole lot of time. And the other point is that before I actually teach it, then I have to either gather and collate all of these stories. And that collating all the stories, compiling them, is actually difficult. So if I have time in future years, I might speak about that. But here, right now, we've been speaking about the topic of the First Council. And one of the most important personages in the First Council was Ananda. So I'd like to give you an introduction to Ananda.
다들 민족이各都 담비 민족의 군거유고
So
군거디
we'll speak about one of the main personages at the first council, Ananda. So his name, please wait a moment.
다 군거디게 셀이야 가르세 다 야게 완 세비나 아난다 슈도아
So his name in Sanskrit is Ananda. So Ananda. So this means joy or joy for all. Here's a picture of him. This is an image of Ananda that was found in the Dunhuang caves. And before we speak about the story of Ananda, I think it's probably to speak about it in this way. The Buddha had many different students, but among all of the many different students, Ananda really stood out in many different ways. So I've thought about several different topics that we need to discuss in introducing Ananda. And one of these topics is how Ananda went forth and practiced the Dharma. So when you say that Ananda stood out among all the Buddha's many students, one reason why Ananda stands out is that, at least according to the oral tradition of the Theravada tradition, both Ananda and the Buddha were born on the same day, and they were both born into the Shakya clan. Ananda's father was Amritodana, and the Buddha's father was Shuddhadana. So the Amritodana and the Buddha's father Shuddhadana, they were brothers. I don't know whether they had the same mother, but they did have the same father, so at the very least half brothers. So this way, Ananda and the Buddha were like cousins on their father's side. Likewise, according to the Theravada tradition, the Buddha and Ananda grew up together in the town of Kapilavastu. That is Kapilavastu, or in Pali, Kapilavatthu. Similarly, so Ananda's father, Amritodana, was also the father of Aniruddha, who was the greatest of those with the divine eye. So they say that Aniruddha's father was Amritodana. So Amritodana had two sons. We don't know whether they had the same mother, but they had the same father. So according to the way it's taught in the Theravada tradition, Ananda's brother was Anuruddha. So the Buddha said that there are the 8 of his preeminent or greatest students. Sometimes they say 8, sometimes they say 10. In any case, among them, the one who is said to be greatest of those with the divine eye was Anuruddha. So that's how it's described in the Theravada tradition. Now, another tradition that's passed down in the Chinese tradition is that Ananda was the son of the Buddha's uncle Shukladana. And the day that he was born was the day that the Buddha achieved enlightenment. Now, the reason why he was given the name Ananda is that when he was born, the king was delighted, and all the courtiers and subjects were also very delighted, so they called him the name Ananda, or joy to all. And he had a younger brother whose name was Devadatta. And his face was like a stainless full moon with a very beautiful, handsome face. And his eyes were like blue utpala flowers. So his eyes were also very beautiful. And he went forth at the age of 8. And so he went forth and he took the full ordination through a 4-part action with a request through the proper ordination ritual. So all of the Buddha students, he was the greatest of those who had listened to much Dharma. And he served the Buddha as attendant for 31 years. And he memorized all of the Dharma teachings that the Buddha had given. And so he was like the treasurer who retained all the Dharma the Buddha taught. Now, in the Vinaya Vastu from the Tibetan Mula Sarvastivada tradition, the Buddha awoke to enlightenment at the age of 35. And on the day when the Buddha achieved enlightenment, the Buddha's son Rahula and Ananda were both born on that same day. Now, at that time, all the relatives of this child was born on an occasion when everyone should be happy. And the reason why they said a day when everyone should be happy is that during the 6 years when the Buddha spent practicing asceticism, there was a word had passed into Kapilavastu that the Buddha had passed away while he was practicing the austerities, and this caused everyone in Kapilavastu a lot of sorrow and pain. And then they heard that the Buddha had not died and that he had achieved enlightenment, and everyone was delighted. They were so extremely delighted that, and that was the time that Ananda was born. And so he was born on a day when everyone had to rejoice, and so he was called by the name Ananda, the joy or all joy. Now, on the 6th year after the Buddha achieved awakening, he returned to his homeland of Kapilavastu. And at that time, when he returned, Ananda was 6 years old, and he went forth at that age. And the person who brought him forth and fully ordained him was the bhikshu Dashabala Kashyapa. Now, it's important that we also need to examine whether this Dashabala Kashyapa is the same person as Mahakashyapa or not. Now, when the Buddha reached the age of 60, he was made the Buddha's attendant. And so from then on until the Buddha reached the age of 80, he served as the Buddha's attendant until the Buddha passed away. And so this is the way it is described in the Mula Sarvastivada tradition. Now, in order to give you a more clear picture of this, I thought I would like to show you a few examples of the different explanations of the Shakya family. And so I'd like to show you like a table or like a diagram of them. So I would like to show this to you now. Otherwise, if I only say it orally, then it's something that you can't really catch on to easily. Now, when we speak about the Shakya family line, there are rather somewhat different ways the Shakya family line is described in the different sutras and treatises. For example, during the 6th century, which is a time when Buddhism had not yet spread to Tibet, but it was a time when Buddhism had spread to China. And at this time, there was an Indian master named Gyanagupta, and he translated a sutra called the Aganya Sutra into Chinese. What it says in this sutra is that the Shakyan king Simahanu had 4 sons and 1 daughter. The oldest son was Shuddhodana, and Shuddhodana had 2 sons, the prince Siddhartha and also Nanda. So Siddhartha is the Buddha, right? And then Buddha had his son Rahula. The second was Shuklodana. And he had 2 children, Tisha and Bhadraka. And then Dronadana, The third was Adronada. He fathered Anuruddha. Then there was Amritodana and Ananda and Devadatta. And so Ananda was older and Devadatta was younger. There was also a daughter, and her name was Amrita. So this is what is said in the Sutra of Going Forth, translated by Gyanagupta. Now, another slightly different explanation is translated probably by the same Indian master, Gyanagapa. In China, the title of the sutra is in Chinese. I thought I translated Tibetan, but I didn't have time. It's in Sanskrit, the Abhinishkramana Sutra. And what it says in this is that Shuddhodana fathered Siddhartha and Nanda. This is the same. And Shuklodana fathered Tisha and Bhadraka. Dronodana fathered Devadatta and Nanda. Now what's put in here? And so here what's different is that Dronodana fathered Devadatta and Nanda. Amritodana fathered Anuruddhana and Mahanama. And then Amrita Rasa fathered Tisha. Amrita Rasa is probably the daughter. She gave birth to Tisha. In other words, explained in Tibetan, shall we say, there is the 8th century translation by the Tibetan translator Kabada Kalpasek of the Vinayavasta. And in the chapter of the schism, what it says there is that the king Simahanu had 4 different sons. He had 4 sons: Shuddhodana, Shukladana, Dronodana, and Amritodana. Amritodana was the smallest. So they agree the same as saying that Shuddhodana had Siddhartha. Shukladana had Tishya and Bhadraka. Dronodana fathered Mahanama and Aniruddha, and Amritodana fathered Ananda and Devadatta. So that's the most well-known explanation in Tibetan. Now, according to many Chinese sources, including the Shaka family line, a text that was written during the Tang Dynasty, it says the Shuddhodana had the same children. Shuklodana had Ananda and Devadatta. Dronodana had Mahanaman and Aniruddha, and Amritodana fathered Tisha and Bhadraka. So when we look at these, the main point, if we look at all of these, is that within these sutras and teachers that is mentioned, if we look at the description of the Shaka family line, they all agree that Buddha and Nanda's father was Shuddhodana, and that the Buddha's son is Rahula. There's no disagreement there. But they disagree as to whether Ananda's father was Shuklodana, Amritodana, or Dronodana. There's a bit different for them. Some say it's Shuklodana, some is Amritodana, some say it's Dronodana. I think there are more who say it's Amritodana. Now, Devadatta and Nandana, whether it was Shuklodana or Amritodana or who it was, except for the Theravada, all the other traditions say that they had the same father. They basically all say that that Devadatta and Nanda have the same father. But the Theravada the Theravada says that Ananda's half-brother is Anuruddha. But the difference is, the question is, who is elder, who is younger? So this is different. So there are disagreements as to whether Devadatta was older or Ananda was older. So to continue with the with the introduction of Ananda. It's, of course, good to know that there are many differences in explanations. We generally don't know whether what we say in Tibetan accords with what's said in other Buddhist traditions, and it's important for us to know this. So I've written down several different sections about talking about this introduction of Ananda. And the first of these is the way Ananda practiced Dharma. And so this has 2 points, how he went forth and how he was trained in the Dharma. The second is how he practiced while he practiced his as the attendant. And then the second point is the fame of Ananda. This has 3 sessions, which I'll come to in order. And so among these, so I've already spoken a little bit about the way Ananda went forth and how he trained in the Dharma. So I'll continue with that. Now, according to the Theravada tradition, so now I'm speaking according to the Theravada tradition. So when Ananda reached the age of 37, he and his half-brother Aniruddha, who they had the same father, and also Devadatta, and many other high-status Shakyas all went forth and entered the Sangha. And the person who gave him the full ordination was another Arhat. And I don't know what his name is in Tibet, but there was an Arhat who was his Khenpo, and he received the full ordination from him. Ananda was extremely diligent. And so during the first rains retreat that he sat, he achieved the result of stream entry. So basically, in that same year, he achieved that result of stream entry in the first summer after he went forth. Later, when the Buddha, when Ananda was teaching the bhikshus, he said to them that when he was practicing, that there was Purnamataniputra, and that Purna was extremely helpful for him. Purna was someone who taught the Dharma to new bhikshus, and in particular, he gave very profound explanations, or he's good at giving very profound explanations about the relationship between the 5 and the aggregates and the self, how the self might be established on the basis of the 5 aggregates and so forth. So because of listening to Purna's teachings, Ananda's understanding of the impermanent suffering and selfness of the 5 aggregates deepened greatly. And in the end, you could say his prajna, or wisdom, was fully ripened. His being was ripened, and he achieved the result of stream entry. Now, Ananda himself was from a royal family, you could say. He's from a rich family. But in the end, he went forth. But he found it very pleasing to lead a monastic lifestyle. He was very satisfied with the monastic lifestyle. And he recognized that his being able to embark on the path to liberation and being able to go forth was extremely fortunate. He thought of this as really great fortune for himself. In his very first year that he lived as a bhikshu's lifestyle, he had a really great interest and enthusiasms for these different methods for taming his own being. And so he had no difficulty at all with leading the monastic lifestyle after he went forth. Now, as you all know, Ananda was later made the Buddha's attendant, right? And when Ananda was the Buddha's attendant, on one hand, he served the Buddha as attendant, but he also, on the other, he continued to practice as he had before he became the Buddha's attendant. He did not take any break from his efforts at practicing the true Dharma. It's otherwise, and once he's been given the name of the attendant, it's possible that that at that point that he was given that title, that he might not have taken interest in in practice anymore. But that did not happen at all. Now he wrote some verses about these, and these are recorded in Italian. To translate them roughly, what they say is, through the full 25 years, my Dharma practice progressed. So it progressed continually. It really improved greatly. And so for that reason, he said, I had never felt any worldly cravings or worldly desire, and he realized the nature of true Dharma. Likewise, for the full 25 years, I never felt any worldly hatred and realized the nature of the true Dharma. So there's there are these verses that he taught. Now, what these verses teach is that during the 25 years, or that during the duration of the time when he served the Buddha, he was still someone who was on the path of learning. He was not an individual who had achieved arhat, but he was someone whose practice continually improved because he put effort into his practice continuously. His practice did improve. So he says that he never felt any desire or anger. So what this shows is that there is a profound connection between him and the Buddha, and that he served the Buddha with great faith and dedication, but he didn't feel like that there was any didn't even feel that there was something special about that in terms of his practice or for him that would make it easy for him to achieve liberation. Instead, he practiced and made efforts to achieve liberation just as if he was an ordinary monk. And so it's like that someone who knows how to think like this is worthy of being the Buddha's attendant. Because when you're made the Buddha's attendant, you might think, oh, I'm really something. I'm so extremely fortunate. Now I don't really need to practice much, right? And you think, I don't have to, over one hand, you don't have time to practice. And the other hand, you think, oh, I'm so fortunate. And when you have that type of pride, then it's possible that you wouldn't practice the Dharma as diligently as you had before, but that did not happen at all with Ananda. So next, I'm come to the second topic of speaking, and this is the Ananda's fame, the renown of Ananda. So when you talk about the renown of Ananda, there are three parts. The first of these is like a living embodiment of the embodiment. The second is being a person with no enemies. The third is being a treasurer who has listened much. So we would say, I've translated I've translated this in this way as a living embodiment. It's something that we often say, so you can understand what we mean. It's like a living embodiment of the Dharma. So Ananda had many different qualities, and to go through each of them would be very difficult, but I'd like to point out a few of them. The first of these is that he had like a living embodiment of the Dharma. And when you say that he was a living embodiment of the Dharma, what this means is that Ananda had a very high level of understanding of the Dharma. So even the Buddha himself said that the Buddha was like the living Dharma, or like the Dharma in flesh and blood. And what this means is that, like, on one occasion, it's a lay student or a householder student of the Buddha who asked the Buddha, and the question he asked the Buddha was, after I've prostrated to the Buddha and the Sangha, so at that point, these are the Buddha and Sangha, or the main people whom you could prostrate to. So how can I make a prostration to the Dharma? You're the Buddha, I've prostrated to you. There's the Sangha, right? So there's the noble Sangha there. I've prostrated to the noble Sangha. So now how can I prostrate to the Dharma? When he asked this, the reason why I had to ask that question is that at that time, the Dharma had not been written down yet. These days, when you talk about prostrate to the Dharma, we put a volume text, we prostrate to that form of that text. It's like of support of our focus. But at that time, there was no support for the Dharma, no representation of the Dharma. And so what the Buddha said at that time, he said, "Child of noble family, if you wish to prostrate to the true Dharma, then you should prostrate to the treasure of true Dharma, Ananda. He is the treasure of the true Dharma, so you should prostrate to him." And because the Buddha had given this instruction, then this lay student invited Ananda and in particular and made offerings. He gave some offerings. He made an extensive meal for him. And at the same time, he gave a valuable piece of cloth to Ananda. Ananda took this valuable piece of cloth and he gave it to the noble Shariputra, with whom he was very close. And then Shariputra offered it to the Buddha. The reason is that supreme field of merit is the Buddha, and so if it's offered to him, the merit is greater, so he therefore offered it to the Buddha. And so this kind of shows that the Buddha is like the representative of the Dharma, the living representative of the Dharma. Then on another occasion, the Ananda asked the Buddha a question, and then the Buddha went out, and the Buddha went out. Excuse me, I've lost my internet connection. So the Ananda went out, and the Buddha replied. The Buddha replied, and what the Buddha said is that Ananda is only a learner, that is not yet an arhat. But if you look for someone as much prajna as him, it wouldn't be easy. Now, the next point is that Ananda was a person with no enemies. Now, generally in the world, when people are in the famous, then naturally in the world, it happens that there are more people who become jealous or resentful of him. But Ananda was actually, if you wonder whether Ananda had any such enemies or people who resented him, there were none like that. And this is a really special situation. This is because the Buddha also had himself had enemies. The Buddha had enemies who tried intentionally and specifically to harm and to create obstacles for him. They're like Devadatta. So the Buddha had enemies. And so the Ananda had this good situation that didn't even happen for the Buddha. Now, did this happen because of luck or coincidence? It's not. This also is probably related to events from his previous lives. So it's due to the situations, his actions in previous lives that made it so that he would not have any enemies. And likewise, also, from the very moment he entered the Gyan of the Dharma, he had a really clear intention, clear decision about what he was doing. From the moment he entered the gate of the Dharma, he wasn't like us who don't really know what's going on. We're not sure if it is or isn't when we enter the Dharma, but he was not like that. He had clear intention at the moment. And so because of this, no matter how much renown or fame he had, it didn't affect him or budge at all. It didn't cause him to be prideful at all. Not only did it cause him to have any pride, he had no pride or ignorance. He merely had, he remembered that it was because it's because of the qualities of the true Dharma that he had these abilities. And so he had no pride or arrogance at all. And so people who don't have any pride or arrogance naturally have fewer enemies. There are few people who resent them or who feel envious of them. They're very modest and they have such good intentions that they naturally have fewer enemies or people who resent them or oppose them. Now, according to the Theravada tradition, Aniruddha was Ananda's half-brother. They're the same father. So Aniruddha severed all ties to society. He had no connections to society, and he spent his entire time resting in deep meditation, practicing dhyana meditation. And he didn't go out much. And so, because he was not really connected to society, and so he wouldn't be at all surprising that he had no enemies or no adversaries. But Ananda's situation is very different than that, because he was just had to stay in the middle between the Buddha and all of the Buddha's students. And then all these people who always come to see the Buddha, and they always have to go through Ananda. And among all those different people, there might be people who are kind of small-minded, some people who are kind of problematic. These type of people are, of course, going to come. And so these sort of people would often have a lot of malice or a lot of adversarial feeling towards him. It would be difficult for him, but he had a very particular quality here that he became someone who had no particular enemies or adversaries, someone who everybody liked. And this is really a special quality of Ananda's. Now, another of Ananda's qualities is that he's called the treasury of much listening. And what this means when we say that it's the treasury of much listening is that in the Mahayana Mahaparinirvana Sutra, the Buddha said that Ananda had 8 inconceivable qualities. The Buddha also said that Ananda was a treasury of much listening. So now here, when we're speaking about primarily speaking about the first council, you might think it's a little bit disconnected or not related if we speak a lot about cite Mahayana Sutras and cite the Santra. It's disconnected to cite many not Mahayana Sutras. But our teaching now is not like a class where a teacher is teaching a student's history in school. Instead, it's to kind of see, when we understand how is it that the followers of the Buddha and the disciples of the Buddha practiced and how they studied the Dharma. So it's good to understand from this what is important for us to help our own minds. And so I think that there is a real point to teaching what is said in the Mahayana Parinirvana Sutra. So what it says here is, when the Buddha was speaking about Ananda's qualities, when he spoke about these qualities of Ananda, the first of these is that Ananda has spent 20 years serving me, that is, being my attendant. So he spent that time serving me, but when I've been invited as a guest to places, then the Buddha has never come to us. This is a special thing about Ananda. Usually when people invite the Buddha to these events or lives and stuff, they imagine Ananda would go and try to look impressive as he went there, but he never did that. So when the Buddha was invited to events and meals and so forth, Ananda did not follow him, or go along, I should say. The second is that from the time that Buddha served me until now, this has been a long time, but the Buddha has old robes. And Ananda and never used the Buddha's old robes as his own, as Ananda's own robes. That's another quality. The third quality is that since the time Ananda began serving until now, he always knew when it was an appropriate time to see the Buddha and when it was inappropriate to go see the Buddha. And he never came to see the Buddha at an inappropriate time. Otherwise, and because he's the attendant, because he's really familiar with him, he could go in and see him at any time, but he didn't do that. Now, the fourth is that Ananda has been my attendant, and it's been a long time since he's been the attendant, but he has not given up all the afflictions of desire. But he has gone along with me as my attendant to royal palaces and the harems of high-caste queens and so forth. And when you go to these palaces and the homes of high-caste families, you see a lot of beautiful women. And like you see in many the goddesses and Naga maidens, but even though he has seen them, he has never felt any desire or lust. There's a mistake there. There was a slight problem with what I showed before, so I will show it again. So this is it. So that he has seen beautiful women and the maidens of gods and nagas, he has never felt desire. So that is the fourth quality. Now the fifth quality, this is a very important one. The important quality is that since the time he became the Buddha's servant, it had been a very long time, and within that time, he's memorized all the 12 different types of sutras. Basically, that means all of the teachings that the Buddha taught, that he was able to keep them in mind and remember them, even if he only heard them a single time. And he never at all asked questions about what he said one there. For example, it's like if you have a jug that's filled with water. So you've got a jug filled with water, and you fill that so it's completely filled with water, and then when you have an empty jug and you pour it all into the one, so whatever was old in the old jug, then you pour it, so it all goes right into the new jug. The same thing. It's like when you have a USB pen drive, you put the pen drive in the computer and you put all the files in your computer, you put them on there, then you take them, if you put it into another computer, then you can copy the files that were in the first computer, the files, the documents, and so forth. You can put it in the new computer. So similarly to that, then whatever the Buddha would say, the Buddha would then be able to memorize it all without missing even a single word. So there's never even asked once about this during all the time he spent as the Buddha's attendant. He only asked about something about the Dharma about one time, or he only had to receive Dharma once because he memorized it. Once he had memorized it, he'd never need to ask about it again. Now, the sixth quality is that since the Buddha, Ananda became the Buddha's attendant, though he does not have the wisdom that can read others' minds, he knows when the Tathagata is in Sumadra. But Nanda always know what type of samadhi the Tathagata was resting in. There are many different types of samadhi, and Nanda always knew which one the Buddha was resting in. Likewise, since Ananda became the Buddha's attendant, though he had not achieved the wisdom of aspirations, even without a clairvoyance, he's able to perceive which sentient beings would, if they came into the Tathagata's presence, achieve the results spiritual practice immediately, which ones would be able to would achieve it later, or whether they'd achieve a divine or human body. He just knew it immediately. He could understand it immediately. Now, the eighth one is that since he became the Buddha's attendant, he understood everything the Buddha has thought and then said. And so when he said that he's understood everything the Tathagata has thought and then said, then he's saying that there's the thought. So he understands what the Buddha's thinking. Even if the Buddha didn't say it, he would know immediately what the Buddha had said. So that's that one. And so these are the eight qualities of Ananda. And so these are qualities that not only a Buddha has, but also the Buddha's attendant needs to have. And so the Buddha said that the Buddha, Bhikshu Ananda, has these eight conceivable qualities. And so for this reason, the Bhikshu Ananda is known as the treasury of much listening. And so this is also, so the Buddha's attendant had these qualities. And so this is like the teacher's attendants need to have qualities. In other words, if you have an attendant of some guru, first it's very difficult when you're choosing an attendant for a lama, right? You try to do our best to choose a good attendant, but if we don't really know how to choose an attendant, then it's difficult, right? For example, sometimes what is said is that when lamas are young, then you said that you have to have older attendants. You need someone who has a really pure intention. They said that we need that. Sometimes what we choose is, we said that someone who's kind of a little bit small-minded. So they have to pure intention, but sometimes they have they're too small-minded, and because they're too small-minded, then it causes difficulty. The reason the Lama has ways of thinking that are different than ordinary people's, that are rather large and broad. And so something can see what they really like to do. And if the Buddhas can't see that because they're too limited, they've got too small mind, they say it's not okay to do this, it's not okay to do that. You have to do this, will happen if you do that. And it's always saying that, then if the attendant is always saying things like that, then it's like putting the Lama into a pressure cooker. And so when you put them in the pressure cooker, then it's like you can't do anything. It's always you're in the pressure, and then at one day the pressure cooker is going to explode. The pressure cooker will just burst. And from one perspective, so everyone says this, so that the lamas aren't doing something, the tulkus aren't working out. But one aspect it is like that, but another way of thinking about it is that it's not like you can completely blame all the lamas and tulkus. The attendants also bear some responsibility. They need to have someone have a rather broad view, someone who's heard and understands a lot. It's important that the attendant be someone like that. Otherwise, if someone has real pure intentions and a really good person, but then picks someone who's kind of small-minded and a bit limited, very, very confined, then it creates a lot of problems. And so that's another thing we need to consider. So if we continue to speak, then to continue with the introduction to Ananda, the third point is attending the Buddha. So I've divided this into four. So the first is the 8 conditions for being the Buddha's attendant. The second is follow him like a body in its shadow. The third is the connections with the Buddhas, with the public, and the fourth is how he's willing to sacrifice himself. Now, of all the different things that we know about Ananda, we all know that he was the attendant, Buddha's attendant. Now, the Buddha had many different attendants. But the Buddha praised him as being the best of among his many different attendants. Now, when we look at what Ananda did as the Buddha's attendant, they're just using one or two words and saying attendant or servant really do not suffice to describe about all the qualities of the way that he served, attended the Buddha. He wasn't just like a attendant or a servant. You could call him his secretary. You could say that he was his helper. Or you could even say it was like the Changzi in the Tibetan tradition, or the administrator. And basically, if you talk about this, you'd say he'd be the person who does everything, the jack of all trades. He's someone who can do anything at all. No matter what he's doing, then this person says, oh, I'm the one who can do it. So normally, when we say attendant, then usually we think of someone who's like a servant, someone who's lower. And that's the feeling we normally have. So when we say that Ananda was the Buddha's attendant, basically what it means is that the Buddha was a person who administered all the Buddha's internal and external affairs. He's a person who oversaw them and took care of them, and he offered his opinions with pure attentions to the Buddha. Now, these are not clearly recorded, and particularly there are many situations that show how the Buddha and Ananda are very close, but there's a danger that we will no longer see them. They'll be invisible to us. So it's not all right to think that the Ananda was merely the Buddha's attendant, someone who washed his feet and served him. Of course, he was an attendant. But he wasn't just the Buddha's attendant. He also had many other different qualities in the way he used the Buddha's helper, the Buddha's Changzi, administrator, the Buddha's personal secretary. So he had these many different qualities. Now, according to the Theravada tradition, it said that Buddha and Ananda were born on the same day. And so when they say that they're born on the same day, then that when they got to the age of around 52, the Buddha convened a meeting of all the bhikshus, and what the Buddha said in this meeting was, during the last 20 years, as I've guided the Sangha, I've had many different attendants. However, he said, I've really never had one who's been really worthy of it or being right for doing it. All my previous attendants were a little bit too headstrong, and they couldn't really identify them. And now I've reached the age of 52, and I'm getting older. So I need an attendant in whom I can have confidence and whom I can rely upon. And when the Buddha said this, there are many students around. And most of the Buddha said, oh, I'll do it, I'll do it. They said, I'll do it, or they'll do it. And when they all said, I'll do that, but the Buddha did not agree to any of them. It was like Shariputra and Madhya, they all said, I'll do it, I'll do it. But the Buddha didn't accept any of them. And when the Buddha didn't accept any of them, then these older bhikshus all thought to themselves, they thought that in terms of the one who was, the one who knew how to think and think, who was modest, they thought he'd be best. And so the elder bhikshus expressed this hope to Ananda and that he'd be the Buddha's attendant. They asked him, please be the Buddha's attendant. Now, basically, before Ananda had been the Buddha's attendant, there were many different attendants. But there was no particular person who was continually the Buddha's attendant. When the Buddha was going on alms, the bhikshus would take turns accompanying him as he goes and they would carry his robes and his alms bowl. And so there are many bhikshus who had served him in that regard. So even though there are many bhikshus who did serve him in this way, there probably wasn't any monk that turned out really, really well. And many of them just didn't really listen to everything the Buddha said. In particular, one time, there was someone who was attending the Buddha, and someone called Nagasamala. was helping the Buddha, and they came down the road to when they got to an intersection in the road. And when they got there, what the Buddha said is, we can't go this or there. We need to go by another way, go around. We can't just go straight here. But the attendant didn't listen to what the Buddha was saying. He just went down the road that he wanted to go. And when he went down that road, when he was going down that road, they met a bandit. He met a bandit. And the bandits beat him and they stole the Buddha's alms bowl and robes. So there is that story. And this is taught in the Theravada tradition. Likewise, we also have a story about the bhikshu named so there was a bhikshu named Lekpe Karma in Tibetan. And this is recorded in Tibetan tradition in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra. In the Tibetan tradition, you might not think that he's really there, but he is mentioned in some Chinese sutras and in Tibetan traditions. In any case, he was someone who had served the Buddha. So Lekpe Karma's name is Shunarakshita in Tibetan. So in any case, the story was that at that time, everyone that the Buddha was asking who would be the Buddha's attendant, then everyone said, I'll do it or they'll do it. But Ananda didn't say anything. And the Buddha said, why is it that you haven't said anything? And then Ananda said, well, the Buddha knows clearly who would be appropriate as an attendant. And it should also be someone the Buddha has confidence in, right? And from my perspective, I would like to be the Buddha's attendant. I would like to serve the Buddha, but I didn't say anything at that time. Because the main thing is you have to look at what the Buddha thinks, what the Buddha wants. And I say, I'll do it and you'll do it. It doesn't make any difference. The main thing is that the Buddha knows in his mind who is worthy of being the Buddha's attendant, and that person himself the Buddha should decide on just that person himself. Other than that, I have nothing to say. And so that is what Ananda said. So later, then after that, the Buddha said, he said, then the Buddha one who is worthy and appropriate of being worthy of and appropriate for being my attendant is Ananda. Now, when the Buddha said these words, then actually ordinary people would be really happy about this. And then that all of the Buddha's best students had been crowding and saying, I'll do it or they'll do it. But I got this great opportunity to think I must be someone. But Ananda himself, even though he had gotten such an opportunity, he didn't think that he was anybody. He didn't have any pride about it. Not only did he feel no pride, he said, if I'm going to the Buddha's attendant, then I need to have 8 conditions, some conditions for being your attendant. If the Buddha accepts them, and only if the Buddha accepts them will I be the Buddha's attendant. This is what he said. And so what these so after as for what the conditions are, I'll tell you about them after our 30-minute intermission. Now, according to the Theravada tradition, when the bhikshus asked Ananda to be the Buddha's attendant, Ananda said that there were 8 conditions or 8 hopes that he had before he could become the Buddha's attendant. If the Buddha accepted these 8 conditions, then he would be able to serve as the Buddha's attendant. Now, the Ananda's 8 requests or 8 conditions were what I would like to show you next. Among the 8 conditions, the first are conditions of things that we're not allowed to do. Is a hope that 4 things that the Buddha not do. The first of these is that the Buddha could not give Ananda robes. So there are robes that the Buddha had been offered, that the Buddha had used, and Ananda said, please do not give them to him. Likewise, he asked, please, the Buddha would not share food that he had been offered with Ananda. So not to offer the food that the Buddha had been given, and not to give it to Ananda. Likewise, if there are lodgings that have been offered to the Buddha, please not to give them to Ananda. And the fourth is that when an individual would invite the Buddha, either to teach the Dharma, or when you say to teach the Dharma, but mainly what we're speaking about are places times when the Buddha would be invited as a guest. And there are large meals are being offered to the Buddhas, and please do not bring Ananda along. And these are 4 things that please don't do these. Next, there are the 4 conditions of things that would be allowed, or basically saying the Buddha saying, please do these for me, the 4 requests, Ananda's 4 requests. The first is that if Ananda were invited somewhere, then the Buddha would have to accept it. So the Buddha would have to be allowed to go along. The 6th is that the next condition is that if a traveler arrived from far away, then the Buddha could welcome them and arrange an audience with the Buddha. So please give Ananda the opportunity or the authority to do so. The next one is that if Ananda had any questions or doubts about the true Dharma, he could ask the Buddha about them at any time. And so there's no division about times when he might ask the Buddha and when he might not ask the Buddha. Please give him the opportunity at any time. And the 8th is that if the Buddha ever taught the Dharma to someone at a time when Ananda was absent, that he would please repeat that Dharma to Ananda. So there are these 4 requests about things he'd like the Buddha please do these. And so in total, there are the 8 requests, or the 8 conditions for him to be the Buddha's attendant. That's quite possible we might think about these. When everyone's asking Ananda to be the Buddha's attendant, instead of saying, oh, yeah, certainly, he's instead spelling out certain conditions that this has to happen, and this doesn't happen, you can't do this, you can do this. So I think it's kind of disrespectful to make such conditions. But Ananda said that he had reasons for why he made these conditions or made these requests. The first reason for this is that many people might think they'd become the Buddha's attendant in order to be close to the Buddha, and then when he was close to the Buddha, he would receive a lot of food and clothing and so forth. And so people might think that was the reason why he became the Buddha's attendant. And so he made the first 4 requests or conditions in order that did not happen. Now, the last 4 requests is that once he had become the Buddha's attendant, he wouldn't take any interest in practicing the Dharma. So there's the danger that people might think this, and so for that reason, So these are the reasons why the Buddha made these, or the Ananda made these conditions. Now, this is taking it according to the Theravada tradition. In our Mula-Sarvastivada tradition, so whether it's the Vinaya scriptures or whether it's in the Chinese tradition scriptures, within the middle-length discourses of the Buddha in the Chinese tradition, it said that Ananda had three different conditions. Now, these are easy. The first of these conditions was that they're the old Buddhas that the Buddha had used, and Ananda said, "Please don't give them to me." And then, secondly, that when the Buddha was invited by an individual person to receive offerings, then please do not take me along. And the last of these is that when he was attending the Buddha, then please give him the opportunity to see the Buddha at any time. And so at that time, he made three requests. So it's a little bit different than in the Theravada tradition, although the meaning comes to the same thing. The main point's the same. It's just a difference of the number of requests. In any case, when the Buddha heard these conditions that Buddha said, then the Buddha realized that they are all accorded with the Dharma, so the Buddha accepted all of them. And so from them on took on the responsibility of attending the Buddha, and he served the Buddha for 25 years. So this is what is said in the Theravada tradition. The next topic is accompanying the Buddha like a shadow. Now there's a text called The Verses of the Elders, the Theragatha in the Theravada school. And there are three stanzas by Ananda. And in these three verses, he speaks briefly of how he served as the Buddha's attendant for 1/3 of the Buddha's life. So to give the main points of this, to say this just in general, not as a rough translation, I, Ananda, have served the Buddha for 25 years. And while I served the Buddha, I have had respectful and loving intentions, and respectful and loving actions, and respectful and loving speech. I've served the Buddha in this way, and I've been contemplated as inseparable as a shadow and a body. And when we look at this, the Buddha was such a great being, like the greatest being in the world. And so around him, he needed to have someone who could understand what he wanted to do. An attendant or a servant could do that. It's very hard to find someone like this. If you think about it, in Tibet, there are many lamas who've been great scholars and protectors, but in their presence, there have been very few who've been able to understand everything the Buddha wants and been able to serve him as they want. And so Ananda was someone who could understand what the Buddha intended, and he became like a good friend of the Buddha. For a very long time, he served the Buddha with genuine care. And the way he served him was like, for example, in the mornings, Ananda would first go out and fetch water. It's not like there are taps the way we have these, so we could just turn the water. He had to go out and carry the water. And he'd fetch the water so the Buddha could wash his face. And then in the Indian tradition, there are the toothsticks, right? They didn't have toothbrushes; they had toothsticks then that you'd chew on. So he'd offer the Buddha toothsticks so that the Buddha could wash his teeth. Likewise, you would prepare the Buddha's seat, or whether it was washing the Buddha's feet, or massaging the Buddha's back. Sometimes if the Buddha was maybe a little bit in very hot, if the weather was very hot, he would fan the Buddha. He would wave the fan. Similarly, he would do all the cleaning in the Buddha's lodgings. So this is all of this Ananda did. Likewise, also Ananda was the one who sewed the Buddha's robes. I saw it in text. I don't remember if it was in Tibetan text or in Chinese text. I've looked at so many texts, and so sometimes I can't really remember exactly whether I saw it in a Chinese text or in a table text. Anyways, what it says is that Ananda was a really good tailor. He could sew really well. So so the Buddha had him make the bhikkshu's robes, and also most of the Buddha's robes are sewn by Ananda. Also at night, would sleep nearby the Buddha. Because he'd sleep nearby the Buddha because if the Buddha called him, then he could get up immediately. The 16th Karmapa had a chamberlain. I can't remember his name. I don't remember. It's probably some sort of either attendant or a chamberlain. In any case, when the 16th Karmapa was in in the evening he would lie down without taking off his belt. He just lighted. He never loosened his belt at night. And when the 16th Karmapa said, "Come," then he would just get up immediately. And so some of the elder monks told me about this. And so it's similar. Ananda slept near the Buddha, and whenever the Buddha called him, he was able to go immediately. Likewise, when the Buddha would go to a temple or there were meetings of the Sangha. When the Sangha gathered to perform actions of the Sangha, then the Buddha would Ananda would ask him to come. And even after the Buddha had gone, he'd go and see if there had been anything that had been left behind. If there had been any robe or anything that had been left behind, he would look for it. Likewise, when the Buddha wanted to summon the Sangha, then the one who made the announcement is Ananda. The Buddha would say, "Oh, Ananda, go call the bhikshus." And so the person who made the announcements was Ananda. And sometimes he would have to call all the bhikshus, even at midnight sometimes. So Ananda was whatever the Buddha wanted at any time. The Buddha was always ready to get up and go and do whatever. When the Buddha was ill, then it was Ananda's responsibility to give him his medicine. So whether giving him medicines or giving him water, that was Ananda's responsibility. One day there was a bhikshu who was really severely ill, and the Sangha neglected him, and he was left behind. When he was left behind, then the Buddha and Ananda knew this, and so they went and they worked together, and they bathed the patient. So after bathing, this is what we called it. It was called a resting place. So these days, what we would call like a spa, a place where you can get massages and so forth. There's like a building where you can go and have some body work done, and so they brought the body to this place. So there's that story also. So in brief, Ananda spent every day doing all the various internal or external tasks that the Buddha asked him. You could say whether he's like his foreign minister or his internal minister. He's in any case, he was like a good mother or like a good wife. He was, in the worldly terms, he's saying he was serving them. So the Buddha, in early terms, was his paternal cousin. In Dharma terms, he was the Buddha was his teacher. In any case, he served the attendant genuinely. So this is another quality of Ananda. And then following that, next we have, as I said before, I've gone through accompanying him like a shadow. So the next one is how he was like a bridge between the Buddha and the public. Now, what this means is that Ananda was. So we said that there are like several thousand bhikkhus, right? Ananda was like the person who made the smooth connections between the Buddha and the bhikkhus. Likewise, there are also non-Buddhists who came. There are many people come. The person who arranged the connections between the Buddha and these people was also Ananda. So Ananda was like his good personal secretary, or was like his helper, his personal assistant. Likewise, when there were difficulties that happened, then he's the one who helped. For example, like he and Shariputra and Moggallana tried very, very hard to sort out the many different problems that arose within the Sangha because of, difficult relationships within the bhikkhus. For example, there was once like the dispute among the bhikkhus in Kaushambi, or there was also the time when Devadatta fomented the dispute that led to the schism. And at that time, most of the bhikkhus followed Devadatta. And so at that time, Shariputra and Moggallana Ananda tried in many different ways and tried very hard to resolve the dispute. So Ananda in this basis was the person who clarified others' doubts and questions. And worked so that the order of the Sangha and the stable rules could be maintained. The one who primarily did this was Ananda. Generally, when he was in the Sangha, he was always impartial. He was like an unbiased observer. He didn't take anyone's side. Likewise, when bhikkhus would come to see the Buddha, he's the one who arranged the audiences. So it's like he was like the audience secretary in these days. And he was also, when he had to speed the teachings to the Buddhist instructions to the bhikkhus, it was him who did this. In any case, Ananda had great responsibilities. He was the person who was like the person who made the relationships between the Buddha and his bhikkhus. He was like the bridge between the Buddha and the public. So no matter who had a request, he tried to fulfill it, and he never tried to create barriers or stop anything. And so this is another thing that shows how Ananda served the Buddha well. Now, the next point is how Ananda had the affection of being willing to sacrifice himself. Now, Ananda had a great willingness, a great affection to be able to sacrifice himself, his own life, if necessary, to save the Buddha. For example, when Devadatta loosed a mad elephant, you could say a mad elephant or something like a wild elephant, not one who'd been domesticated by people, but he loosed a wild elephant on the Buddha, and this elephant was about to kill the Buddha. And at that point, the Ananda, without any regard for his own life or limb, he got up and he stood in front of the Buddha. He thought that if it cost his own life, as long as the Buddha that happened, he thought he had to do something that would protect the Buddha's life. And at that time, the Buddha said 3 times, Ananda, don't do that. You're going to get yourself killed. Don't do that. But Ananda wouldn't listen to it. The last thing, displayed miracles and tamed the elephant. And because of that, the elephant became peaceful and tame. And only then did Ananda stop trying to sacrifice himself. Otherwise, Ananda, from his own part, decided that he was willing to sacrifice himself. And because of acting in such ways, then Ananda's fame grew even greater than before. People say, oh, he's a really good disciple, and had gained a lot of renown for it. And the Buddha also, when he explained this to the bhikshus, he said that Ananda did this not only in this lifetime, but in previous lives as well. He protected the Buddha's life. And so he told these stories or histories of how Ananda had protected his life before. And so what this shows is that Ananda, it shows the Ananda's character. It shows what his qualities were. And it shows that the connection between the Buddha and Ananda, it was a very long connection. It was a connection over many lifetimes and many eons. Now, the next topic is Ananda's attitude towards women. But I don't need to speak about all of this, and I think it's probably a little bit. Actually, as you all know, Ananda had a really particular connection with women. For example, when women were ordained, allowed to go forth, Ananda supported them. Ananda had a great influence in the formation of the Bhikshuni Sangha. Also, Ananda was very compassionate and very loving and very kindly. So for that reason, no matter who someone might be, he was someone who would look after them and take care of them. And particularly, he would look after people in dire straits or in difficult situations. And so for that reason, he had particular ways of looking after women. But this also brought him a lot of difficulties and a lot of problems. So there are many events related to that, so that I'll speak about these later. So I don't need to speak about those later. So I think it's probably better to leave it there today, so I can relax a little bit, and you can also probably will be happy if you're ending earlier. So thank you.